Heart pounded as the guard stepped back and the door closed behind her. She was alone now. A man stood in the center of the hall. Tall, broad, and dressed in a simple gray uniform. His hair was dark. His face had a scar near his jaw. His eyes were sharp but not cruel. He looked surprised, even a little confused, as if he didn't expect her to look so young or sad. He didn't speak at first, just stared. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, keeping his hands visible, open. "Come, you must be Lasari," he said gently. "I'm Captain Jace Renner." She didn't reply. She just looked away, waiting for him to give the next command, but he didn't. Instead, he pressed a button and the cords on her wrists unlocked. They fell to the floor. "You're not a prisoner here," he said. "You're not a product either." Lasari blinked in shock. Her people had warned her that humans were violent, greedy, hungry for power. But this man? He looked at her like a person, not a tool. He gestured to the hallway. "Let me show you to your room. You'll have privacy, food, and anything else you need, if you want to talk. I'll be around. If you don't, that's fine too." She followed him silently, watching him closely. He didn't try to touch her. Didn't ask personal questions. The room he gave her was larger than she expected, with a bed, books, and even a window to see the stars. Before leaving, he said one last thing. "I know this wasn't your choice. It wasn't mine either, but maybe we can figure something out together." No pressure, and then he left. Lasari sat on the bed, stunned. Where was the cruelty? The harsh rules? The chains? None of them were here. Only kindness and space to breathe. Still, she didn't trust it. She stayed quiet for days. Watching Jace from a distance, he was always polite, always calm. He treated the alien crew members with respect. He cooked his own food, cleaned his own clothes. Sometimes he smiled at her, but never forced her to smile back. One night, she sat near the window and whispered to herself, "What kind of human are you?" Down the hall, Jace sat at his desk, looking at a photo of his family, his brother. Lost in the war, he sighed, not knowing that just a few meters away, a girl once sold like a product had started to wonder if she could still hope. The journey had just begun, and something was changing slowly, quietly, inside both of them. Lasari woke up expecting fear, but instead, she felt. It had been 3 days since she arrived on the human ship. And not once had Jace shouted at her, touched her without asking, or locked her in a room. He simply existed nearby, respectful, quiet, always offering space, not commands, back. On Velroth, she was warned again and again. Humans are loud, violent, selfish. They showed her vids of battlefields and warships. They told her that marrying one was like giving your soul to a beast. But the man walking around this ship, fixing panels, checking systems, offering her breakfast, he didn't match the image at all. She sat at the small dining table that morning, eyes following Jace as he poured her tea. He didn't sit too close, didn't speak until she gave him a nod. Then, and only then, he smiled a little. "I made it the way you like," he said, sliding the cup to her. "I read about your planet's customs. Spiced tea with crushed fruit leaf." Lasari blinked. "You studied Velrath." He nodded. "Before you came, I wanted to know what would make you comfortable. I figured the least I could do is not make things worse." That answer stayed in her mind all day. Not make things worse. She had met nobles who never learned her name, commanders who only saw her status. And here was a human, her groom by force, who acted more like a polite guest in his own home. Later that evening, she explored more of the ship. She found the control deck empty, but glowing with quiet lights. She touched one of the screens gently. Curious, it displayed maps of nearby systems, trade lanes, and patrol routes. "Do you like stars?" a voice said behind her. She turned fast, heart racing, but it was only Jace again. Standing near the door with a small smile, I used to look at the sky every night as a kid, he continued. I always thought space was beautiful and terrifying. At the same time, Lasari didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. Jace walked to the window and stared out at the drifting stars. This ship, he said, wasn't made for war. It was built to carry people, lost ones, from places that hurt them to places that didn't. That's why I agreed to this deal. I thought maybe I could do one more good thing. She tilted her head. You didn't want the marriage either. No, he said softly. I agreed because I owed a favor to the council. I thought they were helping you too, not just solving a debt problem. Lysari felt something tighten in her chest. Her whole life, she had been a number, a deal, a name. On a list, and now here stood a man who talked like she mattered, but still why? Why was he kind? Was it a trick? Was he waiting for her to lower her guard? That night, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts twisted and tangled like vines. She walked quietly toward the medbay. Curious to see more, the door wasn't locked, and inside it was silent except for one glowing screen on the wall. She stepped closer and saw his name, Jace Renner. A full medical report filled the screen. It showed old injuries, broken ribs, shrapnel in his legs, nerve damage near the spine. She scrolled further, her breath caught, wounded while protecting. Civilians on Artel Prime, that was an alien planet. She remembered the war. Their many Valrathi citizens had fled during the attacks. And a human soldier had stayed behind to shield them, taking the damage himself. She backed away from the screen, heart thumping. Suddenly everything made sense the quiet way he walked. The way he sometimes winced when sitting down, the calm voice, the soft eyes. Jace wasn't kind because he was weak. He was kind because he knew pain. Later, she returned to her room and stared out the window again. The stars were silent, watching, as always. Maybe you're not a monster, she whispered. Maybe you're something else. The next morning, she did something she hadn't done since leaving home. She greeted him first. Good morning. Jace, he looked surprised, then smiled wider than before. Good morning, Lysari. And for the first time, that name felt like hers. Something invisible had shifted, not loudly, but clearly. The walls between them had a crack now, a small one, but enough for light to pass through. Lasari stood quietly in the hallway, watching him again. Captain Jace Renner was working on the ship's engine. He wore a black shirt, stained with grease, sleeves rolled up, and his hands moved with confidence. Yet, there was a small limp in his step, one she hadn't noticed before. He never mentioned it, never complained, never asked for help. He just kept moving forward, like a man carrying weight no one else could see. And that's when she realized he was hiding something. Not danger, but pain. She couldn't say why she cared, but she did. Maybe it was because he treated her with respect, or maybe it was because every time she looked into his eyes, she saw more than just a human. She saw a mystery. That night, curiosity pulled her again when the lights dimmed and the ship went into rest mode. She walked silently down the hall. Her feet barely touched the floor as she moved toward Jace's private quarters. The door wasn't locked. Strange, she pushed it open. Gently, the room was neat, with a small bed, some clothes folded on a chair, and a wall covered with maps and star charts. But what caught her eye was a wooden box on his desk. She opened it slowly. Inside were old papers, photos, and a badge marked Galactic Peacekeeping Corps. She picked up a photo, younger Jace, smiling with a group of soldiers. Most of them were aliens. She recognized a Volrathi medic in the corner. Then she found a worn file marked Artel Prime Civilian Rescue Report. Lasari sat down and began to read. The words were hard to believe. Captain Jace Renner led a solo mission to evacuate over 300 civilians trapped behind enemy lines. Despite injuries and heavy enemy fire, he refused to abandon the local non-human population. He remained on site for 48 hours until all survivors were safe. She blinked fast. Jace wasn't just a kind man, he was a hero. And he never mentioned any of it, not even once. Just then, she heard soft footsteps outside the room. Her heart raced. She stood quickly. But before she could hide, the door opened. Jace stood there, surprised but not angry. He looked at the photo in her hand, then at her face. "You found it?" he said quietly. Lasari didn't lie. "I had to know who you really were." He walked in and closed the door behind him. His movements were slow, as if every step was measured, not because of fear, but because of pain. "I don't like talking about it," he said. "Not because I'm ashamed, but because it hurts to remember." She lowered her head. "You saved people. You risked your life. And yet no one speaks of it." "That's the thing," Jace said, sitting down with a sigh. "When you save aliens, some humans call you a traitor, and when you marry an alien, even to protect her, people think you've lost your mind." Lasari looked at him closely now. "Not as a stranger, not as a groom, but as a person. Why didn't you ever tell me?" She asked. "Because I wanted you to see me as I am," he replied. "Not as a soldier, not as a file, but as a man who's trying to do the right thing." Silence settled between them. But it wasn't heavy, it was peaceful, like the quiet. After a storm, she stepped forward. Slowly, "I see you now, Jace," she said, her voice soft. "I don't know what's happening to me, but I no longer feel afraid." Jace smiled gently. "That's all I hoped for." Later that night, back in her own room, Lasari couldn't sleep. The stars outside looked the same, but something inside her had changed. Her heart was no longer filled with fear or hate. It held something else, warmth, a strange, unfamiliar warmth. The next morning, when Jace entered the dining area, he found something new. Lasari was already there, waiting, and this time she smiled first. He raised an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" She shrugged playfully. "I thought I'd serve you tea for once." As he sat down, he noticed the difference in her tone, her posture, her eyes. The cold, silent girl from a week ago was now curious, open, and quietly strong. They ate together, shared stories about their childhoods, hers filled with noble rules and cold silences, his filled with old books and distant stars. When they laughed together, It wasn't force, it was real. And far across the galaxy, two families remained unaware that something powerful was happening on this small ship, something no treaty or contract could create. A bond made not of fear or debt, but of truth and trust. Asterisk, the peace didn't last long. Lysari was beginning to smile more, sleep better, speak freely. She and Jace shared meals, stories, and quiet moments under starlight. The ship felt like a safe place, a small floating home where nothing could touch her. Until the message came. Jace was in the control room when the alert pinged. He opened the comm line, expecting a routine transmission. But the face that appeared on the screen made him freeze. It was Counselor Miran Lysari's uncle. His voice was cold and sharp, like a blade. Captain Renner, you are ordered to return the bride immediately. This arrangement was made under conditions that no longer apply. Jace narrowed his eyes. She is not property. And this isn't a shipment. She stays where she feels safe. The counselor's lip curled. You misunderstand. Human. She is part of a noble house, and we have decided her presence in your care is no longer beneficial. Before Jace could reply, the screen went black. Seconds later, the ship's sensors flared red. An unknown vessel had entered orbit. No identification, but clearly Velrothi tech. Its weapons were armed. Lysari heard the sirens and ran to the control room. What's happening? Jace turned to her, calm but firm. Your family sent someone. They're here to take you back. She felt her heart drop, not out of fear but anger. I don't want to go, she said, her voice steady. You won't, Jace replied. Not unless you say yes. Just then, the ship shook as a gravity hook latched onto the hull. Boarders were coming. Jace opened a secret locker and pulled out a small plasma pistol. He didn't give it to her, but held it loosely in one hand. Stay behind me. If I say run, you run. Understand? But Lysari didn't move. She clenched her fists, fire in her chest. No, this time I won't hide. I'm not someone they can drag around anymore. The doors hissed as 3 armored aliens stormed in. Faces covered, weapons ready, one pointed at Lysari. You will return to Velrath as commanded. Jace stepped forward, blocking their path. She said no. The lead mercenary raised his rifle. You are interfering with a noble matter. But before he could fire, Lysari's voice rang out like thunder. No one speaks for me anymore, she shouted, stepping beside Jace. You want to take me? Then tell the council to come here themselves, not send cowards in armor. The mercenaries hesitated. They weren't prepared for resistance, not from her. The silence grew heavier. Jace lifted his wrist. Communicator. This is Captain Renner. Of the Solace, any act of aggression will be broadcast to the United Systems Alliance, including attempted kidnapping of a peace-bound bride. The lead alien flinched. You wouldn't try me, Jace replied, his eyes cold now. After a tense pause, the mercenaries lowered their weapons, without another word. They backed out and disappeared down the hall. Within minutes, the ship released its grip and drifted away. Gone. The danger had passed, but the fire in Lysari's heart remained. She turned to Jace, shaking. They didn't even ask what I wanted. They just assumed I'd obey. He nodded. That's what bullies do. They don't care about the people, they care about control. Tears filled her eyes. From fear this time, but from rage and release. I'm done being quiet, she whispered. I'm not going back, ever. Jace placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle and firm. Then we'll make sure you never have to. Later that night, as the stars returned to their silent watch, Lysari stood at the window again, but this time, she wasn't just a lost girl. She was something more, a fighter. A voice that had been silent for too long. She wasn't hiding anymore, and the galaxy would soon hear her name. The ship was quiet again, but not safe, after the attack. Jace knew one thing: the Velrothi wouldn't give up easily. They had lost face. And pride mattered more to them than truth. He stood in the engine room, staring at an old panel, faded. Buttons, cracked screens, and a single blinking light: the emergency jump system. It hadn't been used in years. Lysari stepped beside him, her voice low. "What is that?" Jace didn't answer at first. He placed his hand on the panel, like greeting an old friend. This ship used to be called the Solace. But before that, it had another name: Storm Ship 7. Lysari blinked. Storm Ship. He nodded. Prototype class, built for fast jumps through ion storms and high radiation zones. They shut the program down because it was too expensive. I saved one from being scrapped. She looked around, realizing for the first time how strange the ship really was. Some parts looked human, others alien. Glowing softly with energy she didn't recognize. "You rebuilt it?" She asked. I merged what worked. He said, "Human metal, Velrothi shields, Arcturian grav stabilizers. It's not pretty, but it flies." Lysari touched the wall, feeling the hum beneath her fingers. It didn't feel like a ship. It felt alive. Moments later, the warning alarm rang again. 2 ships on radar, heading straight for them. No ID. This time Jace didn't wait. "We're going dark," he said, flipping 3 switches. "Hold tight." The lights dimmed, the engines fell silent, and the entire ship dropped into stealth mode. But stealth wouldn't be enough. "They're scanning," Lysari said, watching the screen. "They're locking on." Jace moved quickly, punching in coordinates. "We're jumping straight into the Corvus maelstrom." Her eyes widened. "That's a storm zone. No one survives that." He looked at her calmly. "That's why they won't follow." The screen lit up with swirling clouds of red and blue energy. Violent plasma storms spinning through space like tornadoes. It looked like death, but Jace was already buckling himself. "Into the chair, sit," he said. "Strap in, and don't look outside." Lysari didn't argue. The ship roared to life as Jace slammed the throttle forward. A wall of light exploded outside as they crossed into the storm. Instantly, the ship began to shake. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered. Sparks flew from the control panel. "We're losing balance." Lysari cried, trying to hold herself steady. Jace was bleeding from the forehead, his hands gripping the controls. "Manual override. Take the secondary controls, now." Lysari froze. "I don't know how." "Yes, you do," he said through gritted teeth. "Trust your instincts. You're not just a bride, Lysari, you're a pilot now." With shaking hands, she reached for the controls. The screen spun wildly, flashing danger signs. She took a deep breath, focused on the stars barely visible beyond the chaos. And then she moved. The ship dipped, spun, corrected, danced through the lightning like a leaf in wind. Her fingers found balance, rhythm, control. Her heart raced, but her hands stayed strong. Beside her, Jace watched with wide eyes. She wasn't just reacting, she was flying. 5 long minutes passed, then 10, and suddenly, silence. The storm cleared, only stars remained. Lysari collapsed back in her seat, breathing hard, sweat dripping from her face. Jace leaned over and placed a hand on her arm. "You saved us." She looked at him, eyes full of fire and disbelief. "I thought I was going to kill us both." He laughed softly. "You didn't. You flew us through a death storm and came out alive. That's something only a handful of pilots can say." She smiled, for real this time, not because she was safe, but because she had taken control. Later, while Jace treated his wound, Lysari stood in the engine room again. She touched the old panel, feeling the hum return beneath her palm. This ship was hers now too. Storm Ship 7. A ship that survived where others ran. A ship like her, Asterisk, the courtroom on Velreth was built too. Make others feel small, tall pillars, cold marble, glowing red lights, and a wide circle of elders sitting high above everyone else. That's where Lysari stood now, not as a silent girl, but as a woman ready to speak. Beside her stood Jace, quiet but unshakable. His presence was like a wall, strong and calm. They had come back not to beg, not to apologize, but to fight. The council chamber was full. Nobles in shiny robes whispered behind raised hands. No one had expected her return, especially not like this head high. Voice sharp, fire in her eyes, Counselor Mirren, her uncle, stood and scowled. This is a disgrace. You were given to that human to settle a debt, and now you return to throw shame on your house. Lysari stepped forward, her voice echoing. I was sold without my consent, treated like property, and then hunted when I dared to live freely. Gasps filled the chamber. Mirren snapped. You broke tradition. You embarrassed your people. I saved myself. She cut in. And I saved Captain Renner's ship from a death storm. I made choices. I stood up. I didn't hide behind old rules. Jace didn't speak, but his gaze never left her face. Proud. Steady, the High Chancellor, a neutral elder with silver. Eyes leaned forward. Lysari of House Vancour, are you saying your marriage was forced? Yes, she said, but I don't regret where it brought me. What I regret is letting others decide my life. The Chancellor turned to Jace. And you, human, do you claim ownership over this union? Jace shook his head. I never did. I offered her safety, freedom, and choice. The rest was hers. The council murmured again. But then another elder, a bitter old woman named Varnith, stood up. She belongs to our blood. Her return must be. In our hands, the contract is clear. Lysari held up a small data chip. This contract? She asked, signed without my voice. Based on lies and greed. She walked to the center and placed the chip on the stone table. Then she smashed it under her boot. The glass shattered. The silence that followed felt like the breath before a storm. I'm not part of that deal anymore, she said. I am not a bride, a gift, or a shame. I am Lysari Renner by my own will. Some elders stood in protest, but the Chancellor raised a hand. Enough, he said, his voice powerful and calm. The Velrathi Code of Rights states that any being noble or not has the right to choose their path if no blood crime is committed. Do you accuse this woman of a crime? The room stayed silent. No, Mirren said finally, his voice low with defeat. No crime. Then let it be recorded. The Chancellor said, Lysari is free. The Council's claim is ended. It was done. As they walked out, Jace looked over at her. You didn't need me in there, he said with a half smile. She grinned. Maybe not. But it felt better with you next to me. That night, they stood on the edge of a balcony, watching the twin moons rise over Velroth's mountains. The sky was full of quiet stars. Lysari turned to him, wearing the same ceremonial dress she had once hated. Only now, she wore it by choice. It was no longer a chain, but a symbol of survival. I never thought I'd return here, she said. Not like this. Jace looked at her, really looked. You turned a forced marriage into a revolution. She laughed softly. Maybe now others will speak too. They will, he said. Because of you, she reached out and took his hand, not out of fear, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. From the shadows, a small crowd watched them. Velrathi girls who had once whispered fears. Nobles who had once followed blindly. Now they saw something different. Union of strength and freedom, not control, and so did the stars. The news spread across 3 star systems in a single day. Velrathi noblewoman breaks marriage law. Human captain defends bride's freedom. Alliance court declares ancient contracts illegal. New rights for alien women begin. but Lysari didn't care about the headlines. She cared about the message behind them, that she was no longer just a girl forced into marriage. She was a voice that reached thousands. And it all started because one human treated her with kindness, not control. Now, months later, she walked through the halls of the Unity Center on one Chiral Station, the first place in the galaxy where runaway brides, war refugees, and silenced women could seek help and shelter. She and Jace had helped build it together. She greeted each visitor with a soft voice and steady gaze. Velrothi. Girls with bruised arms, young alien workers with burned hands. She saw their pain because she had lived it. And now she gave them something more powerful than protection, hope, in her private quarters. She sat at a round table with Jace, sipping hot fruit tea like they did the first morning on his ship. The only difference now was her smile was no longer guarded. It was real. "I never imagined this," she said, watching children play in the courtyard below. "Not in my wildest dreams." Jace leaned back in his chair. "You made it happen, Lysari, not me." She looked at him, eyes warm. "We made it happen, Jace. You gave me the chance to choose." They sat in silence for a moment, not needing to speak. Their connection didn't require words anymore. Later that evening, a group of counselors from another planet visited the center. Among them was a leader from the crueler species, a proud race that once refused to allow females in politics. Now, they were asking for guidance. Lysari stood in front of them, wearing the same ceremonial dress she had once stepped onto Jace's ship with Elmi. This time, she had redesigned it. It no longer looked like a bride's gown. It looked like armor. She spoke clearly. "I was once traded like a bag of coins. But today, I stand not as a bride or a noble. I stand as proof that strength begins the moment you say no to fear." The counselors listened. Truly listened. Some even nodded. After the meeting, a small alien girl from the shelter ran up to her. Wide-eyed and nervous, she held a small drawing, a child's version of Lysari and Jace. Standing in front of a ship with stars above them, Lysari knelt down. "Is this us?" The girl nodded. "You're my favorite story." Lysari smiled and hugged her. "Thank you, little star." That night, back in their quarters, Jace placed the drawing on the wall beside the old photo of his war team, a new memory beside an old one. As they sat near the window, watching ships pass by the station, Jace turned to her. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "I regret that it had to begin with pain," she whispered. "But I don't regret where it brought me." Jace nodded, wrapping his arm around her gently. "Then we did something right." Their ship, Stormship 7, now rested in a nearby dock, still battle-scarred, still half alive. But now it had a new name carved on its side. The Solace Reborn. It would fly again. But not to run, to rescue, to inspire, to carry those with no voice. Toward new beginnings. Lysari stood before the window one last time that night. She looked at her reflection, not the frightened girl in silver cords, but the woman who broke chains with her voice, her will, and her heart. Her smile was real now, and the galaxy would never forget her name.